Hello everyone, and welcome to this ARMA conference on-demand webinar on the topic of research culture, and in particular the role of research development managers and other people in similar roles in supporting research culture. My name is Adam Forrestal Goldberg. My pronouns are he and him. I am wearing a red sort of maroon t-shirt. I'm white. I have hair which in my mind is still a luxuriant chestnut grey, but is in fact in reality grey. It's short hair with a bit of a wave on top, and I've got a borderline stubble beard thing going on. I'm recording this on the 1st of September, so knowing my luck, some major scandals or other things or other events within research culture will break between now and you hearing this, but this is roughly how I think sort of things stand as we are. It's an odd thing, a kind of on-demand webinar. It always seems a bit sort of aggressive and a bit so I kind of see it as a kind of ask nicely webinar. And I don't know who you are, I don't know when you're watching this, whether you're bored on the train or bored on the train on the way back, whether you're in a hotel room avoiding a terrible conference dinner. But thank you for joining. Thanks for dialing in. Hello. Should say that I'm not personally attending the conference. I'm not registered, so I understand there's a way of leaving comments underneath this, which I won't see, which means I won't be able to see them, unfortunately. But you can email me. You can tweet me at Cash for Questions. If there's any points you want to raise, I'd be very happy to pick things up via that medium. But unfortunately, I'm not able to be at the conference either sort of in reality or virtually. But as I say, if there are questions I can answer, I'd be happy to do so. So I'm going to faff around for a moment and see if I can work out how to share some content. And there we go. Hopefully that's us up and running. So what's this presentation about? So it's about better research culture and some thoughts on the role of research development managers. And by research development managers, I mean roughly people who are mainly pre-award, helping academics find funding for their research, supporting them with the applications. But there are also sort of other similar roles that have a sort of greater sort of post-award role, but really people involved in supporting research who are not themselves researchers. I think what I have to say hopefully will apply to many people in those groups. I'm going to take the liberty of telling you a bit about myself, just so you can put what I'm going to say in some kind of context. I've worked in research development in various forms for about 16 years now, first at Keele University and more recently at the University of Nottingham. My roles have been mainly in the social sciences, supporting business, economics, management, geography. More recently, I've moved to a central role where I'm looking after charities, which has given me a sort of much broader overview of the university, and in particular the sort of medical and healthcare research. But primarily, I've been supporting social science research. My academic background, such as it is, I have an MPhil in political philosophy, looks at John Rawls and a theory of justice. So although I don't have a PhD and I'm not a researcher, I do have sort of research experience. I should say I have a stammer. Sometimes that will trip me up. Sometimes I struggle to get my words out. There is a time limit for this presentation, so hopefully that still won't be an issue. One thing I would ask is just bear with me if that happens, because frankly I don't have the time and energy to go through it and edit out all of those things. If we can get this done in one take, I'd be delighted. Also, I write occasionally for Research Professional. I blog at Cash for Questions, tweet at Cash for Questions, and I've also served the NHS, NIHR, National Institute for Health Research, as a public member of one of their funding panels and continue to review applications. So I have experience in terms of research development, in terms of being the poacher, and in terms of sort of being gamekeeper. So roughly that's where I am. I always hesitate slightly to talk about research culture because a big part of research culture and a big part of the concerns about research culture are about the EDI initiative, and EDI concerns. And I speak as someone who has, as a sort of white middle class heterosexual cisgendered male who ticks pretty much all, but not quite all, of the boxes for privilege. So if you're wondering, do we really want to hear from another straight white guy about research culture? I guess I'd say the only thing that's worse than a straight white guy going on about research culture is straight white guys who don't care about research culture. That's not much of a defence, but hopefully these thoughts will be useful. So roughly today, what I'm going to try and cover is sort of roughly 3 or 4 areas, and one is how I think research managers, people in our kinds of role, can help improve research culture. I'm going to talk about some thoughts about our own practices and our own policies, how we behave, how we do our jobs, and I'm going to talk about how we might positively influence others, the power the power and influence that we have. I'm going to talk about writing research culture into grant applications, and finally I'm going to look at what's on the horizon, what might happen next in terms of sort of research culture. Where might we go? What do we need to be looking for? So first of all, our own practices and policies, and I think something I've struggled with is understanding the limits of our influence and working within systems that aren't great, whether that be within our own institutions, whether it be within funding and funding systems, or research and higher education policy in the country as a whole. It can be difficult sometimes because we feel like cogs in a machine where we have very limited power and influence. There's a lot of things we don't like, and we have limited opportunities to try and change things. I'm going to say later, I think actually we do have opportunities to change things, but I think with understanding the limits of our influence has to come being gentle with ourselves. That also affects the limits of our responsibility. That there's a lot of things that we can't change. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot as a result of a podcast I listened to a while ago, and there'll be sort of links and things at the end, is the idea that where discrimination happens these days is about who gets favours and who doesn't. So as research development managers, I'm sure we don't deny anybody our services on the basis of any kind of unrelated sort of characteristic. We're not actively discriminating. We're not sort of saying, oh, I'm only helping white people get research, I'm only helping women get research funding. But it's these extra miles, it's these favours, who gets our extra. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot, because what we can't do and stay sane is give those favours to everybody. So it has to be kind of a selection. Who do we help out? And so I've been thinking about who I help out, and it tends to be the kind of people who I know are going to respond well to feedback, who are going to engage, who value what I have to say. They're the people who I think have a good chance of success. They're the people whose ideas inspire me. And I'd love to say everyone's proposals inspire me equally, but that's not true. Some inspire me more than others. But I've been thinking about, is this the way that when we do favours for people with a shared group identity, is that the modern way in which discrimination happens? There's a sort of really good example that sort of some academics who talked about this raised, about how one academic found that where she wouldn't normally do media interviews, decided she would do one for a journalist who happened to have gone to the same university. And that's not brilliant, is it? No one's done anything wrong because they don't normally do interviews, but that's not sort of really relevant. So I guess I've been thinking about, I'd encourage everyone to think about, who do we go for the extra mile for? Is that fair? And how can we help those who maybe haven't had their share of favours along the way? But in particularly, how do we help those who don't know to ask for a favour, or who don't know that's available? So I think that's something worth thinking about. Another thing we can think about is resisting pressure from above to follow the money in terms of prioritisation. So I'm going to assume that in pretty much no university is there sufficient research development capacity to support everyone and everything. Often we'll be pressured to follow the money in prioritisation, to give more effort to the things with best chance of success, to big money. There's this subtle steer away from small pots of money and can we apply for more and bigger things? And that's fine. And I understand from a university point of view why you might want to do that. But actually, the smaller pots and the smaller amounts of funding tend to be applied for people who are earlier in their career, and they also tend to be people who are going to have protected characteristics, who are going to be less advantaged. So if we have a policy that says, you know, we don't get out of bed for a bid less than $1 million and we don't help anybody below that, this may end up being accidentally, I'm sure, a case of indirect discrimination. If our senior staff going for those £1 million plus bids have a particular profile, and that's something we need to think about. And we should be thinking about how we develop our staff anyway, and we should be supporting these quotes lower value bids, because that's how we develop staff towards the higher value bids. I think we should try not to collude with hopeless proposals. And I think this is important, that there can sometimes be a pressure where someone wants to apply. We don't think they've got a good chance of success. The research director doesn't think they have a good chance of success, but no one's willing to have that difficult conversation with them to explain that. No one's willing to say no. So we just quietly let them fail sort of by themselves with minimal sort of collateral damage. And I'm sure we've all seen this happen. And I think it's a mistake because it wastes people's time, because it clogs up the system with unsuccessful applications, and because generally, if someone has a hopeless proposal, it's a waste of their time. And with, I would say, most academics, and maybe this is my privilege speaking, it's possible to explain why. And once they see it, it's not in their interests. We can dissuade people from applying where they've got no realistic chance. But that's really what we should be trying to do, to talk people out of it, rather than telling people no. But that does need some difficult conversation sometimes and changing people's minds. We need to think about when we send out information about funding opportunities, who are we sending it out to and who isn't on that list. And a lot of the time, if you're like me, it's right, who pops into my head, who are the people who I know are working in this area. And I've taken to having a look at that list, seeing at the people I've named and thinking, are they all white people? Are they all men? Are they all from a certain department? Are those the people who come to mind most readily? And if I have a manel, if I have a male-only list, I'll then have an extra thing. Which women do I need to include? And sort of sometimes some disciplines are sort of very much, sort of very male-orientated. I mean, economics can be like that. There can be other disciplines too. So sometimes, you know, that's the right approach. But having a sort of second thought, have we included everyone? Who doesn't come to mind easily? Who might I have missed out? Is good for research culture and for all kinds of reasons. Something I struggle with in terms of our own policies and practices is that where we have internal panels, whether that's we're only allowed a limited number of applications or we need to do so internal sifting or internal peer review, ensuring diverse panels. Now, my worry about that is that creates work for members of underrepresented groups, or can do. I work with a female professor of economics who essentially refused to do any sort of diversity or diversity related work because if she did that, that's all she'd do. And so I think we need to be very careful about that. And I don't really have a good answer to exactly sort of how we handle that, but that's certainly something that we sort of need to be aware that if we have these internal SIFT programs, we've got disciplinary balanced membership, and as far as we can, we're looking for sort of balance of so some kind of gender balance, sort of so it's not just men, not just women, and if we're able to get not all native English speakers, not all white people, but as I say, sometimes this just won't be possible without putting an awful lot of work on a small number of people who are already disadvantaged under our current system. I think we do a lot of emotional labour in our jobs, and I think that's a positive contribution to research culture. We're coaches, we're counsellors, we console people after applications. If your experience is anything like mine, academics often will feel safe talking to you because you're not another academic, and because there's this slight seal of the confessional going on when you're helping them with a grant application, because they're exposing, they're sharing their ideas with you, and you're helping them. That sort of kind of builds up. So I think being aware that we provide that function, that we can help people, over the pain of rejection, that we can, in terms of when they're not getting funded, and we can support people in putting forward the best possible application. And I think we need to see that as a really positive contribution to research culture, but also think about the toll it takes on us and that kind of emotional labour that then we have to do as part of that. And I think that's an important thing to realise, that a way in which we can be a positive force, and which I'm sure we all are, but perhaps not always fully being aware of it. Now, there's this phrase, this very Instagrammable phrase, be the change you want to see. And this is an interesting phrase, and it's been wildly misunderstood. It doesn't just be the change you want to see, doesn't just mean modelling good behaviour and being an example of the kind of research culture and the kind of behaviour you want. It also means changing yourself. And I think that's the bit that often gets missing in where this phrase, be the change you want to see, gets thrown around sort of quite glibly. And this is one of the reasons I'm thinking about who am I doing favours for, and how do I share that. So it's about how we change ourselves as well as how we behave. And I think that's definitely something worth considering. We should think about our own practices and policies, and we should share good ideas for research culture improvements rather than keeping them to ourselves, to a single institution, a single discipline. We should share them. And some really good work by my colleagues at the University of Nottingham in the philosophy department has been some work on that they've done to look at who gets invited to give seminars in philosophy, and in particular they looked at they looked at gender, they looked at all the things, but they looked at Russell Group and non-Russell Group, which was really interesting. So who got the opportunity to come in and talk, and who got those networking opportunities. And there's a link to the paper they produced, which I think has a methodology that's repeatable by other units who are looking at that. And again, that's in the that's on the sort of the final slide, the link slide. I'm sure there's a way of getting a copy of this presentation to you via the magic of the conference somehow. So I think one of the big ways in which we're influencing from a positive, we can be a major influence, I think, for positive research culture because of our roles. I think a lot of what we do is we can be quiet, timely, effective, non-confrontational in the way that we offer advice. I think there's ways of stopping people doing things that are a terrible idea, and we're just a quiet word saying, hang on, there aren't any women involved in this, there aren't any men involved in this. If we do that deadline, isn't that half term? Isn't that a bit close to Christmas? Maybe we shouldn't have this meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning when people, all these kind of things that we can do in a non-confrontational way, just these little nudges in which we can push things in a positive direction. I think in our roles, we're translators, we're diplomats, we're trusted advisors, we're confidants, and we're fixers. We're able to translate between academics and the university adminosphere because we speak both of their languages. We speak the language of research directors and pro-vice chancellors for research and knowledge exchange, but we also speak the language of rank and file researchers as well, and we have an insight into their experience. So we're able to do that kind of translation role, and we're able to represent views sort of backwards and forwards. And because we're trusted advisors and because we're confidants, we're able to have that kind of positive effect. There's a downside to this. Sometimes I think there can be attempts to sort of draw us into sort of various arguments that are not really any of our concern, or to sort of get involved in various academic feuds, which I always try very hard to stay out of. But we do have this role, and it is a positive one in research culture. I think we can keep EDI and research culture on the agenda by raising that quietly, where effective, where we can, loudly where we need to. And I think we can steer people in the right direction. I think most of the people we work with have better angels of their nature who we can appeal to and who we can remind that we need to do this. One example, I think, is keeping grant income expectations and targets realistic. I'm sure we all fight this battle where the university wants to go for a massive target increase, which we know isn't realistic. So maybe we can try and dial that down, and we should definitely resist any idea about targets at an individual researcher level. This is a terrible idea. We all know it's a terrible idea because the margins of success and failure are so narrow, because when you average out, you get a target that's basically unachievable. Because there isn't an average grant size, often they're massive or they're tiny and there's very little in the middle. So we really need to resist that, because that's one of the worst things that can happen in terms of research culture. And I think we can engage the unengaged into discussions about research culture, whether it's a slightly cynical conversation with people who are skeptical about this, to say, look, if you want to get funding in the future, you need to engage with this, or whether it's really explaining what it's all about to perhaps people who haven't been paying attention. And because of our trusted role, I think that's something we can help do. So I'm going to say a bit about writing research culture into grant proposals, and this is sort of very early stage stuff because not all funders request this. I guess the Wellcome Trust increasingly do, other funders do as well. And I guess this section is just about where I think we are in terms of research culture and grant applications. So we should persuade researchers to take it seriously if they want to get funded, not just to make token efforts in those sections. And my experience so far of working with researchers on this is that really good research leaders at all career stages don't recognise their contribution, like the Dunning-Kruger effect. People who are really good often don't recognise how good they are, and sometimes it takes a conversation. So you ask them about their mentoring, and suddenly it turns out they're mentoring masters and PhD students and undergraduates and talking in schools, and they've done all these things that they just take for granted and wouldn't have thought of as research culture necessarily. But we need to get that out of them and encourage them to put that in writing so they can be recognised for their contribution. I think we should have access to text on institutional policies about research culture, but don't default to them. So I've been asked several times about, oh, do we have templates for this stuff? And it's good to have access to institutional policies so we know what they are, but I don't think funders just want to hear the institutional line. They want to know what individuals are doing, and they want something bespoke to that research area and that applications. And we absolutely should point out manuals, panels that are all male, advisory panels that are all male, research teams that are all male. Again, sometimes that can be for perfectly good reasons. We should point out gendered language, we should point out implicit bias, and we should point out title use consistency, where men get referred to as Professor so-and-so and women get referred to by their first name with titles missed out. I don't see that often, actually. That seems to be on the way out, but looking out for that kind of thing and pointing out those things. But I think this is difficult because one of the things Wellcome Trust have done by asking about research culture is they've made more work for applicants, and they've made the application process longer and more difficult, which is in some ways working in the opposite direction in terms of the research culture that we want, because it's creating more work in terms of writing and reviewing. I think we also need to know that reviewers and funders take these sections seriously. If we're encouraging academics to take it seriously, we need to know that reviewers are as well. We know they're being read. We know that they're affecting final judgments. My worry is that if research culture becomes a hoop to jump through, it ends up lowering the status of research culture. And that could be a problem if it's just something that you have to do, to keep the woke snowflakes at the funding agency happy. It devalues the whole thing, and that's a danger if we're not clear, funders aren't clear what they're asking for or why, and we're not supporting people in the right way to do that. And I think you can't leave your research culture work until you write the application, in the same way that you can't leave your impact work until you start to write the application. So I think we probably need to encourage career young researchers to be thinking about their contribution to research culture from really early stages. And I think it's never too soon in a career to think about what positive contributions sort of might be like, and to record those and to be involved in them. So I'm going to do a bit of crystal ball gazing about what might be coming up next in terms of research culture. And one possibility is the inevitable backlash. And I've been talking about the inevitable backlash for probably about 6 months to a year now. And actually, I haven't seen it yet, but that doesn't mean it's not coming. And I guess what I mean by the backlash is, so people who are accustomed to privilege. Equality seems like oppression. I'd love to know who said that first, because it's brilliant and it's absolutely right. So the point at which we start seeing objections from white, straight, middle-class men to scholarships and other opportunities that are ring-fenced to disadvantaged or minoritized groups, we might start getting complaints. So we see it in other areas, not academia so much, but I think that's started. And I think there may be this pushback about the idea that research culture has always been awful, and that postdocs have always had to work ridiculously hard, and the sides of the career pyramid have always been steep, and that's just been the competition. That's how it was. Never did me any harm, made me the man I am today, and it is always men. Notice. So we may get some of that. That may be on the way, and I think we need to sort of gently sort of push back against that, or firmly push back against that. But I think it's coming. I think it is a matter of time before we start seeing that. When we talk about EDI and discrimination and disadvantage, the thing that gets missed out a lot is social class and social economic status. There's been some frightening figures I've seen recently about, which I should have written down actually, about the number of academics and PhD students whose parents were also academics and PhD students, or come from kind of sort of similar advantaged backgrounds. But it's really hard to know what to do about it, because we can't always tell what someone's social class is. We can't tell by accent alone or appearance, and it's not entirely clear what we try and do, other than we kind of sort of make sure people are paid properly, that we don't have a kind of unpaid internship model, and we push against that whenever we find it. At Nottingham, we've got this sort of very exciting scheme that's just been developed, where we can give early work experience placements to undergraduates from historically disadvantaged or minoritized groups, that hopefully give a bit more exposure early career to research and to what research is. So that's something that can help with that. But it's almost the level of the area of discrimination that doesn't get talked about enough. I think also we have intractable structural problems within academia, and there's just nothing we can do about it, really. There are more talented researchers than there is money to fund their research. There's more talented researchers who want academic careers than there are academic careers to go around. It is legitimate for a university to want to manage the performance of academics and to make sure they're bringing in sort of a reasonable amount of external sort of research funding. And it's how we sort of balance all this, because these structural problems push us towards, I think, drive a lot of the problems in research culture. It's this shortage of everything at all levels. It's a shortage of careers, the shortage of money, and this sort of, I think, can lead to an arms race where we end up sort of long hours cultures, ever higher demands to submit applications for more and more money, ever higher demands for sort of success rates and bring in money, or we end up in a kind of race in a different kind of race, a race to the bottom, where because we have loads of PhD students and early career researchers who desperately want an academic career, we don't have to treat them well, we don't have to pay them well. There will always be people willing to take on these sort of short-term contracts for not much money, for teaching a module here, a little bit of research there. And it's a structural problem. The difficulty is stopping that exploitation, making sure we're treating those people properly. And I think the raised expectations that come with this focus on research culture may mean that it's going to be difficult. It may mean it's going to raise expectations which may be difficult or impossible to meet given resource constraints. We can have the best research culture in the world. There's still not enough academic careers for everyone who wants one. There's still not enough funding for everybody who wants it, and there's not enough funding to satisfy every university research strategy. These are just sort of systematic issues. There's just sort of no way around them. But when we talk about improving research culture, as I say, this may raise expectations, and so I think we need to do better somehow. So finally, some useful links. As I say, I don't quite know how you'll get a copy of this presentation, but I'm sure you will. How Favouritism Leads to Injustice. So Hidden Brain podcast interview transcript. There's also, those academics have also sort of written a book. There's a nice blog post about what Be the Change actually means. I've written a blog post about fictional heroes of research development, where I talk about fictional figures like Sergeant Wilson in Dad's Army, who I had a picture of earlier, who I actually think are a really, really good model for sort of research development, and how the subtle influence that we can have. Linked to research admin memes, where the Pinocchio meme sort of came from. Lots of good stuff there, a lot of US focus, but that's good. And there's a link to what my colleagues in the philosophy department have done in terms of improving their seminar invitation practices. Excellent. Well, that's all from me. I hope that roughly corresponds with what you were expecting. If it wasn't, you always have the option of turning off or tuning out early. As I say, I won't be able to read the anything underneath in the chat or the comments. I've not registered for the conference, but do please email me or tweet me if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your time and attention.